My son was diagnosed with autism in 2004. And initially, we were told, with the best of intentions by the experts and the therapists and the doctors, that there wasn't really anything that we could do. And there was a part of me that understood why they were saying this, meaning that Western medicine didn't really have any answers. But there was another part of me that thought, I think there probably is something we can do, but we just don't know what it is yet. One day in that same year that he was diagnosed, 2004, I did always notice that these terrible tantrums that he would have, which a lot of autistic kids have, which are down to neurological trauma rather than, I can't have that toy. He was better, he was calmer when he was out in the woods. As you can see, we're lucky we live in the country. So I have lots of trails cut through the woods in back of the house here. And I would spend hours walking on them with him. And one day he got away from me, went the other direction, not along the trail, through the undergrowth before I could grab him. And he got through my neighbour's fence into the horse pasture and threw himself under the feet of this mare here, who's called Betsy. And Betsy is a notoriously grumpy old quarter horse mare. Aren't you? You are a bit grumpy. And I should move so you can see her. But she's very dominant. She's very much the boss mare of that herd. And I thought Rowan was maybe going to get trampled. He threw himself literally on his back, but he didn't. Instead, she did something quite extraordinary. She bent her head and she began to lick and chew with her mouth and half close her eye. And that, in horse language, is a submission, where you recognize someone else higher in the hierarchy. It's a bit like a dog showing its belly. What they call horse whispering is a way of getting horses to do that, and there are techniques you can use. However, I've never seen a horse spontaneously offer that behavior to a human being before, much less an autistic babbling 2.5-year-old. Cut a long story short, I work with tribes in southern Africa, helping displaced tribes get their land back. And the tribes that I work with all have a very strong tradition of healing through the use of laying on of hands, prayer, an altered state of consciousness, trance, call it what you like. And it seems to work for them, in that if you spend a lot of time down in these parts of the world, you see people get sick and get better and get sick and get better. And you can't help but notice this, because they will use Western medicine when it's around, but it just frequently isn't around for months and months at a time. So this wasn't anything new to me. I've been around it ever since I was a little boy because of my family in Africa. But when Rowan was diagnosed in the same year that he met Betsy, I actually had to bring a delegation of these people, Bushmen from Botswana, to the United Nations in New York and to the US State Department. Some of those guys on that delegation were trained healers in their culture. They met Rowan and they very casually offered to do a bit of work on him. And I thought, well, why not? The worst that can things happen is nothing, right? Can't hurt him, because it's just, a bit of singing and prayer. But for those 4 days that they were with him, he really did start to lose some of his obsessive behaviors. When they went away, those guys, he fell back into the depths of his symptoms. However, by then, he was still going every day to Betsy. And I thought it was too dangerous to ride with him. But then I thought, well, you know what? This is where he wants to be. He's showing me that this is where he wants to be. Maybe I should strap on a pair and see what happens. So I spoke to my neighbor who owns Betsy. It's not my horse. And he said, he's a very old school Southern gentleman. He said, have at it. And so I put a saddle on her and I said to Rowan, do you want to get up? And it was a rhetorical question. I didn't expect any kind of answer. I'd never had any lucid expressive language from him before. But to my surprise, he said up. And I didn't know if that was what they call echolalia or if that was for real. So I thought, all right. So I put him up and I climbed up behind and we rode off. And I said, do you want to go to the woods or the pond, just for something to say, see how he'd respond? And he said, to the pond. And again, I thought, well, I just don't know if this is real or what. Or we got to the pond and a heron got up and went flapping away, and he said, heron. And I didn't know he knew that word. So I thought, shit, he's talking. And then I started saying, well, do you want to go fast, slow, this way, that way? And he was just directing me. And it was literally like the cork came out of the bottle, that this language that had been impossible to access. And literally about that time, we'd been told by his speech therapists that they'd never get anything from him, that they were about to give up. And I was like, Doesn't matter. I think we have a therapist at home who's got 4 legs and a tail, who's cheaper than you anyway. I think maybe we'll give this a go. And so we basically just started living in the saddle together. And we'd just come in from riding, and Rowan had just been talking and talking. And I'd been thinking, gosh, you know, wouldn't it be great if I could get him back to those shamans, those healers, and combine these two things? And I'm like, hold on, I've got to go to a place that combines these two things. Where's that place? It's Mongolia. And I just had this feeling of the heart. I said, that's where we have to go. We have to go to Mongolia. It's the place that combines, one place on the planet that combines shamanic healing with horses. Of course, that's where we have to go. And I just had this strong gut feeling that if we did it, there was going to be some really strong, radical, positive change with Rowan. I didn't know what it would be, but I just knew clear as day. It was like a physical feeling in my gut like that. People talk about your gut feelings, but it literally was like a hand pulling at my diaphragm from inside. Physical, couldn't, you know, not cerebral. So of course I fielded the idea to Kristen, who said, no way. And at that point, you know, Rowan was actually still too young to withstand the rigors of a trip like that. So I sat on the idea for a couple of years, and during those couple of years, we lived in the saddle together, Rowan and I. And all his language just kept coming, but his incontinence, you know, his tantruming, his inability to make friends, these problems, you know, remained. And so when we did finally go out to Mongolia, about 2.5 years after that first epiphany, there was a second epiphany that happened in Mongolia for me, which was that I thought initially I'd made a big mistake, and that the first ritual with the shamans was too much, too long, too loud, too much stimulation, Rowan hating it. And then something changed in Rowan after about an hour, and he started loving it and laughing and joking and trying to tickle the shamans and stuff. And then he turned to this little 6-year-old boy who was there, opened his arms and said, "Mongolian brother." And I was like, oh my God, it's working. Okay, we just have to keep going with this. He had 6 more tantrums really in his life over 2.5 weeks that it took us to get back from that part of Siberia to here where I'm standing now. And normally that would have been, you know, 6 tantrums would have been 1 day or half a day, depending on whether it was a good day or a bad day. So it really changed, and I can't say why. And I'm not here to sort of be a born-again shamanist or say shamanism cures autism or horses cure autism, because Rowan's still autistic. It's just that he's so functional within his autism now that it comes across much more as sort of a quirk. But those dysfunctions, the incontinence, the tantruming, the inability to make friends, and initially the inability to talk, all those went through the horses and being with these healers. I'm interested in this idea of gross national happiness instead of gross national product. You know what I mean? So this is something I've been hearing lately, that the idea that you can measure a country's wealth or success in how happy the emotional quality of life of the people is, rather than the material wealth. What epiphanies do is that they increase that general stock in trade, because any one person's epiphany always impacts everyone else around them. And what's wonderful is we're always sort of being impacted by other people's epiphanies like that, and feeling those blissful ripples coming off other people's epiphanies. I think that is the principal force for creative good in the world.